Hello and happy Wednesday. Today on the Busy Bride podcast, it is a solo wedding tip episode, and we are talking about the 10 questions you should ask your wedding vendor before booking them for your wedding day. So, I'm a wedding photographer, and a lot of these questions will be based on vendors that are very personable, just like a photographer or videographer, something like that. And all of these questions may not align with a more bigger vendor like a venue or something like that. So keep that in mind. But without getting more into it, here's those 10 questions you should ask your vendors.
Hello and welcome to the Busy Bride podcast. I'm your host, Gabriella Marie, and I created this podcast to help you research vendors and learn valuable advice as you plan the most special and true to you wedding day of your dreams. Let's get started.
Okay, so every wedding vendor is different, and you should tailor your questions based on each vendor. So this is more of like a generic list of questions to ask each wedding vendor. But definitely look up, Google has some great resources on specific questions to ask your photographer versus your florist versus your dress, like bridal boutique, the person who hems your dress. Your DJ, anything like that. And you can listen to all previous episodes on the Busy Bride podcast where I interview different vendors like planners and musicians and hair makeup artists and stuff like that. So that should also give you some good questions to ask your vendors specifically. But in generic terms, when hiring a personable wedding vendor, there are 10 questions that are a good to have in your arsenal for the interview process when you're vetting the vendors, things to ask them. So let's get into it. Question number 1. Can you share recent examples of your work? This is big, especially for people like me, photographers, for videographers, even for hair and makeup artists, for florists, because everybody's work is changing. And during busy season, especially, it can be hard for us vendors to keep up with our websites and our portfolios and things like that with recent work because we're so busy serving our current clients to the best of our ability. So sometimes there may not be super recent work on websites. So it's good to ask to see examples of recent work. And in photographers' case, you'll want to ask to see a full gallery so you can see how they photograph in all sorts of lighting situations because there's a ton of different lighting situations on wedding days, and lighting really affects how pictures turn out and just how people photograph. So Instagram's really a highlight reel. That's why it's good to ask for a full gallery to see recent examples of photographers' work. But this is just a good generic question to ask any personal vendor. So that's the first question. Question number 2. Do you have liability insurance? A lot of venues require that vendors have liability insurance, so this is just a good question to ask right off the bat. I have liability insurance. I'm sure every vendor who would need it would have it, but it's just good to know right off the bat if the vendor has it and can work at the venue that you're getting married at. Okay, question number 3 is what's your payment structure? And this is just good to know because vendors will be structuring their payments differently based on what works for them and their business. So it's just good to have in mind, be prepared for how much to pay at certain points, when things are due, if there will be reminders, if you can turn on auto pay, how you can pay. This is just a very logistical question to have down. So these first couple of questions I'm going through are very logistical, and we'll get to some fun questions towards the end, I promise. But that's that third question. And then the fourth question is the least fun question to ask, and that is, what is your backup plan in case you can't be there? Never fun to ask, never fun to talk about, but it's always good to be prepared. So, an example of an answer to this question is, for me as a photographer, for standard weddings, I bring a second photographer with me. And that second photographer is somebody who I trust to be able to photograph a full wedding day on their own. So, in this case, my backup plan would be that second photographer would step up to be the lead photographer for the day. So, there's already somebody there, it's covered. And then I would use my network of photographers to find a backup second photographer because it's much easier to find the second photographer last minute than it is to find a lead photographer. So that would be an example of an answer to a backup plan question. As long as your vendor has thought about it and has a plan in place, you're good to go. It's just, it's always good to be prepared because you never know what life throws your way. Okay, question number 5. What are your travel fees like? So, wedding vendors travel a lot usually. I am based in Philly as a photographer, but I travel like all over Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, New York. I'm even going to Colorado this year. So, hiring your wedding vendor, they may not be like, right next door to you. So, everybody has different travel fees. And since as a wedding vendor, we're traveling a lot, like, it's a lot of wear and tear in our cars. It's a lot of extra time away from family. So it's normal to have travel fees, and it's good to be prepared upfront to know if there are travel fees, so you're not surprised by anything on the invoice. Question number 6: what are your overtime fees and your overtime policy? So this is about adding extra hours to any sort of wedding package you would hire. So this is most often asked for photographers like myself, for videographers. I'm trying to think of any other vendors who may do this. Coordinators, I'm assuming would stay the whole day, but I'm actually not sure. So yeah, good to know. Again, if you even can add extra hours onto a package, because again, every vendor is different and what those fees are, and also when you're able to add them on. Some vendors will have like a cutoff date, like, okay, after this day, you're no longer able to change your package or add any extra hours onto it. So it's always good to know and be like fully certain that you have everybody booked for the length you need them by that day. Question number 7. Now we're getting into the fun questions, okay? Those are like the logistical questions, like you gotta have to ask those. Now it's the fun questions. And I think this is important for you to ask like your very personal vendors. So, question number 7. What's your favorite part about your job? Now, this is a question that very rarely gets asked, but I think it is so important because how your vendor answers this question will show you how much they love what they do, what they're passionate about, and like there's bonus points if their favorite part of wedding day aligns with your favorite part of wedding day. It just means you're like, a match made in heaven. But I think this is super important because a lot of wedding vendors, every wedding vendor I talk to loves love and loves what they do. It is very much a job of passion for sure. So it's fun for you to hear the answer to this, and it allows you to see just how passionate your wedding vendor is about their job because that will, impact how they photograph your day, how they serve you on your wedding day. If they love what they do, they're going to do the best job that they possibly can. So that's that question. Question number 8. Which package do you recommend for our wedding day? So you ultimately get to decide what package you book, and what you want for your wedding day. However, your vendors are the wedding day experts. They've been to countless weddings. They have a pretty darn good idea of how to best make your vision come true for their specific service. And I think it's always a good question to ask, like, okay, like, we've told you what we want, but what do you think? Like, how do you think you can best make our vision come true? Like, what package do you think we need to go with to make that happen? And it's no pressure if you don't want to book that exact package, but I think it's still great to get that down pat and get their opinion because hiring a wedding vendor is a very big decision and you want to have all of the information you possibly can before hiring them. Okay. Question 9 is kind of back to the logistical question, so I'm all over the place. But the ninth question is there tax? Which, again, not a fun question, but just a good logistical question to have up front so you're not surprised in the invoice. As a photographer in Pennsylvania, I have to add PA state sales tax onto my packages, which sucks. It's not fun, but that is life. And so there is tax added onto my packages. And it's, again, just good to know, have up front. That's that. And then the 10th and final question. Again, something that doesn't really get asked. This is something that, as a photographer, I volunteer um, on calls with clients. Like I'll say, okay, it's time for my spiel. But sometimes vendors may not get to this, so good question to ask. Number 10. Please give us a rundown of what the wedding planning phase looks like on your end and what the wedding day looks like on your end. Okay, loaded question. You're going to want to give your wedding vendors space and time to answer this. So, as a photographer, I'm pretty involved throughout the planning process, especially if there's an engagement session or something happening beforehand. And then on the wedding day, I'm with you all day. It's a big deal. So, my answer for this is very, very long. But it's also good to know, like, if your florist is going to be in touch a lot or not leading up to your wedding day. It's good to know, like, what your hair and makeup artist needs to know before your wedding day. So, asking your vendors this question allows you to prepare like, okay, we're going to be contacted a lot like 3 months out from our wedding day, which typically is the case. PSA. Um, which allows you to just be prepared, have your ducks in a row by that time. And then on the wedding day, if you know that your florist is like not going to be seen all day, you can trust that they're doing their job, even if you don't see them hanging around, because that is typically the case. They do a great job, but they're kind of behind the scenes. So yeah, this just kind of gives you an idea what the wedding planning phase looks like, how much you're going to be contacted, what you can expect, and then same thing for the wedding day. Again, it's just like getting your expectations straight, and is usually volunteered at least by me, but good to know from your other wedding vendors. So those are the 10 questions I think you should ask your wedding vendors. Little bit of a, what's the word? Caveat. Little bit of a caveat. I have never planned my own wedding. Like I'm not married. I've never had my own wedding. So all of these questions come from the perspective of a wedding photographer and a very personable wedding vendor. Somebody who shows up like, I am me showing up on your wedding day and not a company or anything like that. So that's kind of like where these questions come from. But I'll run through them one more time really quickly so you can jot them down if you need to. If you're driving, you can maybe like make a little voice note after this using Siri or something. I do that all the time. But these are the 10 questions I think you should ask. Number one, can you share recent examples of your work? Number two, do you have liability insurance? Number three, what's your payment structure like? Number four, what is your backup plan? Not fun, but needs to be asked. Number five, what are your travel fees like? Number six, what are your overtime fees and your overtime policy? Number seven, what's your favorite part about your job? Number eight, which package do you recommend we book for a wedding day? Number nine, is there tax added on to the package? And number 10, please give us a rundown of what the wedding planning phase looks like on your end and what the wedding day looks like on your end. I hope this helps as you're searching for vendors, vetting vendors, and hiring vendors for your wedding day. There's a lot to consider. If you're listening to this, I just want to say you're doing a great job. Like you're doing amazing. There's a lot. There's a lot that happens for planning a wedding, and it's oftentimes your first time planning a wedding. So you're doing a great job if you're even trying to figure out the best way to go about this. So I just want to encourage you and say that it's going to be great. And if you are really being intentional about who you book for your wedding day and how you plan your wedding day to be, like, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing no matter what because you're marrying the love of your life. But it's going to be even more amazing if you are intentional throughout the planning process. So just wanted to give you a little pat on the back. You're doing great. I'm here for you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Now go hug your person, and I'll see you next Wednesday.